It's okay. Just a little turbulence.
It feels scary.
I know. Just breathe with me.
Okay.
Hey, it's gonna be alright.
Are you sure?
I promise.
The first engine failed at 30,000 feet, and the second one followed before anyone could finish praying. The cabin lights flickered, oxygen masks trembled in their compartments, and the aircraft dipped with a violent shudder that turned ordinary passengers into terrified strangers gripping armrests and whispering desperate promises to the sky. In row 8, seat A, a quiet single father tightened his hand around his daughter's small fingers, his face calm in a way that did not match the chaos unfolding around him. If you believe in kindness, courage, and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Silent Hope. Stories like this remind us that sometimes heroes sit silently among us. His name was Ethan Cole, 37 years old, former U.S. Air Force pilot, now just another civilian wearing a worn denim jacket and tired eyes. To most of the passengers aboard the commercial flight departing from Denver, he was invisible. A man traveling alone with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, quiet, polite, unremarkable. They had been visiting Lily's grandparents for the weekend. It was the first trip they had taken since Ethan left active duty 2 years earlier, since the divorce, since the night he packed his flight suit into a cardboard box and told himself that stability was more important than pride. Ethan had once flown F-16s through narrow mountain corridors and across endless desert skies. He had once answered to a call sign that meant something in the air, but that life had cost him too much. Long deployments, missed birthdays, a marriage stretched thin until it snapped. When Lily asked why he wasn't home for her school play, something inside him broke, so he chose to be present instead of heroic. Now, as the aircraft jolted violently and passengers screamed, Ethan felt the familiar shift inside his chest, the old instinct waking up. The captain's voice came through the intercom, strained but controlled, announcing a dual-engine failure due to a severe bird strike. They were attempting to glide and restart, but altitude was dropping rapidly. The nearest airport was too far. Panic spread like wildfire. Some passengers cried openly, others froze. Lily looked up at her father with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan brushed her hair back gently and told her to keep breathing slowly. His voice never shook. He closed his eyes for a moment, calculating instinctively. Airspeed, glide ratio, weight, wind direction, terrain below, years of training resurfaced like muscle memory. The plane lurched again. A flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, trying to keep balance while checking passengers. She noticed Ethan's steady expression, and something about him felt different from the rest. The cockpit door opened briefly as the first officer moved toward the rear to assess cabin conditions. Ethan caught a glimpse of the instrument panel beyond, heard fragmented words about total thrust loss. Without drama, without raising his voice, Ethan handed Lily her small backpack and told her to stay seated and keep her seatbelt tight. He kissed her forehead and stood. He approached the flight attendant calmly, showed her his retired military ID, and explained his background in as few words as possible. The fear in her eyes shifted to fragile hope. Moments later, Ethan was in the cockpit. The captain, mid-40s, sweat lining his brow, glanced at him quickly. There was no time for formalities. Altitude continued dropping. Restart attempts had failed. The left engine was unresponsive. The right showed severe damage. Ethan's eyes scanned the instruments with surgical precision. The situation was catastrophic, but not yet hopeless. Outside the windshield, below the cloud layer, a river cut through a stretch of open terrain beyond the outskirts of the city. Ethan remembered similar emergency simulations. Water landings were brutal but survivable under the right angle and speed. Air traffic control had already alerted nearby military aircraft on a training exercise. 2 fighter jets were diverting toward their position to provide visual assessment and guidance. Minutes felt like seconds. The captain hesitated only briefly before allowing Ethan to assist. There was no ego at 30,000 feet when gravity was winning. As the aircraft descended through clouds, the 2 approaching fighter jets became visible off the wings, sleek, powerful silhouettes against the pale sky. Ethan recognized the shape immediately. F-15 Eagles. He had flown alongside pilots like them once. Radio chatter filled the cockpit. One of the fighter pilots requested confirmation of the assisting pilot's call sign for coordination. The captain looked at Ethan. For a split second, time froze. He hadn't heard that word in years. Call sign. Ethan swallowed, his voice steady but softer than it had once been. He gave the name he thought he had left behind when he chose fatherhood over flight. The response from the fighter pilot came instantly, laced with recognition. The pilot knew the name. Years ago, Ethan had led a training maneuver that saved another aircraft during a desert storm simulation. His reputation had traveled farther than he realized. The tone in the cockpit shifted. Respect replaced uncertainty. The fighter jets flanked the crippled aircraft, assessing structural damage visually and relaying wind conditions over the river corridor ahead. Ethan coordinated descent angle and speed with the captain, guiding the massive jet into a controlled glide. Inside the cabin, Lily gripped her backpack and remembered the way her father's hands never shook. The river grew larger in the windshield. Ethan calculated the approach, compensating for crosswind drift. The key was to land parallel to the current, nose slightly elevated, wings level at impact. There was no room for fear, only precision. At 500 feet, silence settled over the cockpit. No more attempts to restart, no more options, just skill. The aircraft skimmed the surface, tail striking first with a violent spray of water. The fuselage slammed down hard but aligned. The wings held. The nose dipped but did not break apart. The impact was brutal but controlled. The cabin erupted in screams again, but this time of shock, not finality. The plane floated. Water surged around the lower fuselage, but the structure remained intact long enough for evacuation procedures to begin. Emergency slides deployed. Passengers poured out onto floating rafts and shallow water banks along the river's edge. Ethan did not leave the cockpit until the captain confirmed evacuation. When he stepped back into the cabin, soaked and exhausted, Lily ran into his arms. Sirens echoed in the distance as rescue teams approached. The fighter jets circled once more overhead before banking away. News helicopters soon followed. Cameras captured survivors wrapped in blankets. Emergency crews moving quickly, children crying and parents holding them tightly. No lives were lost, not one. Later that evening, at a temporary relief center in Colorado Springs, reporters began piecing together what had happened. They learned about the quiet man in row 8, the retired pilot, the forgotten call sign. Ethan avoided cameras. He sat beside Lily, brushing dried river water from her hair, listening to her describe the big splash as if it were part of an adventure story. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a father who had simply done what needed to be done. But something inside him shifted that night. For 2 years he had believed he left flying because he failed, because he couldn't balance sky and family, because stepping away meant surrender. Yet when it mattered most, the sky had not forgotten him, and neither had he forgotten how to answer. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived from passengers, handwritten notes filled with gratitude, drawings from children who called him the river pilot. One envelope came from the fighter pilot who had recognized his call sign, thanking him for the example he once set. Ethan realized something powerful. Being present for his daughter did not mean abandoning who he was. It meant redefining it. He began volunteering part-time with aviation safety programs, mentoring young cadets, teaching them that courage is not about glory but responsibility. Lily attended one of his talks and watched from the back row, pride glowing in her eyes. The world saw a heroic emergency landing. Lily saw something simpler. She saw her dad. If this story moved you even slightly, if it reminded you that quiet strength often sits unnoticed until the moment it is needed, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Your engagement helps keep stories of hope alive. And before we close, comment "True heroes sit in row 8 if you believe courage does not need applause." One evening months later, Ethan and Lily stood by the same river where the aircraft had touched down. The water moved calmly now, reflecting the open sky above. Lily asked if he ever missed flying. Ethan looked upward, watching a distant aircraft carve a white line across blue. He did miss it, but he no longer felt divided between two worlds. He had learned that heroism is not about altitude. It is about presence. It is about answering when called. And sometimes the engines must fail for a man to remember who he truly is. The quiet single dad in row 8 never sought recognition. Yet when the sky demanded a name, he gave it without hesitation. Not to prove anything, but to protect the future sitting beside him. And in doing so, he taught his daughter, and everyone watching, that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently, until 30,000 feet when everything depends on it.